I'm Chris. This is P2TK9, and welcome back to another Dog Talk. Come here, Toby. Toby, come here. I'm joined this week by Toby, a house guest who's here for some overnight boarding, and always Ica, so they may be in and out of the shot with us. So very quickly, few housekeeping items. Why has it been so long since the last video? My apologies. The day job has kept me pretty busy for the 3 weeks prior to this. The fourth week is entirely my fault. I sat down in the shop, did 2 hours last weekend on the subject at hand, and did not turn the microphone on, and I talked for 2 whole hours on a subject into a dead microphone. And because I was using the microphone audio, the camera did not have audio from the phone. So it was a complete loss or a 2-hour rehearsal, either way you want to look at it. So that's why it's been 4 weeks since the last video has posted, but we're going to take care of that today as we reshoot this. Coming to you live from the bunker down here in the Irish Wolfhound Secret Social Club, also known as the basement, because it's 101 in the shop with the doors open and the fan going, all the fans going. So that's not happening today. So down here where it's much cooler and nicer. With that being said, P2TK9 is an equipment manufacturing company. We make our own equipment right here in the shop that you've seen before in videos and on Instagram. Please go over to p2tk9.com and check out what we make over there. Thank you so much. I want to give special thanks to my accounts that are the most frequent listeners that always leave very nice comments. Frequency K9, Chaotic K9, and Isle of White Sheps. Great accounts, great folks. Thank you so much for listening and watching every one of these that I put together. With that being said, I already mentioned that I went 2 hours on the last video, so it's probably going to be the same for this one. Again, no script, just going right off the top of the head. So let's get into it. Tracking and trailing. We're going to talk about tracking and trailing this week, and the reason for that, I had a couple of different possibilities for the subject matter of this video. Then again, the 3 weeks prior during the day job with stuff going on, it kind of shifted my focus to tracking and trailing. The day job has put me in contact with quite a few law enforcement agencies in the area the last 3 weeks, as well as tracking with the dogs from the day job, and then a special guest with the day job prior to last week. So I'll get into all of that. The way I laid it out, I want to kind of go chronologically to make this thing make sense, but I need to set the table first. So I mentioned we're talking about tracking and trailing. Tracking and trailing means using a trained dog to follow the passing of a person in this discussion from a point A to point B travel. This is different and apart and separate from area searching and scouting. They are trained differently. They have different applications. So with that being said, I want to make sure that along the way I highlight the differences and make sure that we keep those separate. I mentioned that tracking trailing is following a person or persons traveling solo or in a group from a point A to point B route of travel. Scouting and area searching means that you are picking general parameters or a perimeter set by security or backup officers, and you're getting on the downwind flank of a given set of boundaries, and you are working into the wind. You're on the longest downwind flank, and that wind is bringing scent to you, and you start slicing off between your boundaries, your left and right limits, slicing off pieces of terrain in lines of patrol, advancing into the wind, trying to pick up scent and make an immediate head throw and follow that scent to wherever this person has hidden themselves. So with that being said, you train these separately, you keep them isolated, compartmentalized, then you can add them together in real world applications later. But I want to be very, very clear on that these two things are separate. Again, a running theme in a lot of my videos with tracking and trailing, what are we talking about and how do we define that? Again, trying to have these hard, nailed down definitions. They're a mistake. We are humans trying to use spoken language to explain the behavior of a dog who cannot speak to us, who cannot give us any feedback about what's going on, can't tell them what their perspective is in any of this stuff, and then convey these concepts to other humans to try to replicate. So with that being said, I'm going to start chronologically, as I had stated before, and go from the start of my tracking career up to the week before last. When I got my first police dog, I believe I've mentioned this before, but anyway, I'll hit on it again. My department had been buying and training their dogs in-house, and all of the training that other dog teams and officers got was kind of an OJT in-house class, a little bit of dedicated training for a week or so, and then a lot of the training on training days as time went by. I was the first guy to be able to get a dog and go to the actual facility for training and be paid and away from work and only focus on the dog training. I went to my first basic course at Von Litt Kennel in Denver, Indiana. I got a PH2 Malinois that also had a Spoorhound certification, which means tracking for KNPV, and came back to the department with this dog. And so there was a lot of pressure on me and a lot of eyes on me and some jealousy and haterade going around because I got to go to this class. At that point in time, Von Litt Kennel, this is pre-September 11th, 2001. Von Litt was not as busy as they got later during the period following 2001. Ken was coming down and doing 2 seminars a year, a spring and a fall, at my agency. And he convinced the agency to allow me, because I was the new handler getting a new dog, to come up there, buy a dog, get in-house training there, and come back to the department and see how that compared to the old format. So kind of setting the table for you. When I go up to Von Litt Kennel, I'm introduced to tracking for myself and my own dog above what I had been doing as helper once I got onto the program and was kind of an OJT status and general untrained, unlicensed, uneducated decoy and all these other things. But I'd been laying tracks and watching these other guys and trying to figure it out. So with that being said, when we get up there, the Von Litt Kennel training methodology is a dog is following crushed vegetation, ground disturbance, shed clothing fibers, skin rafts, the skin cells that are being shed from a person all the time, and hair follicles. And then on the backside of that, add fear scent. So with that being said, if anyone already has a problem with that this early into the video, let me remind you, right here is a tracking dog that I have for my day job that tracks completely off leash. I do not even have to use a leash on this dog for tracking anymore. But the one thing that I can't find out from her is, what do you smell when you're tracking? I can't ask any of my dogs. I've gone through dozens upon dozens of dogs on the day job side and trained multiple hundreds of teams and have thousands and tens of thousands of hours in both real world deployments and observation and training environments. And I still can't ask any of these dogs, what is it you're following in any of these situations? So with that being said, let's continue with the talk here. So I outlined what it is that I was trained that they're following. I started engaging in the training, and I went to class with my dog in a January class and got back to my agency and started on the road with my new dog. Again, a PH2 Malinois, tons of obedience. Ken was always really, really good when he was involved with the students and involved with the dogs. He can pick the right dog for the right person like few other people can. and pick me a dog. We were just instantly simpatico, got great rapport in a very short amount of time, and we were just a great fit. So with that being said, when I get back to my agency, we've got a lot of rapport. Training is going well. Me and this dog are on the same page. And my first live track happens in mid to late June of that year. And I'm not that far away. The scenario was another officer makes a vehicle stop. They instantly have a scuffle, and the guy bails and runs off into an adjacent wooded area. And immediately the call comes out, hey, start the dog this way. I've got a guy running on foot. So no set time, no contamination issues. I get there within 5 minutes, get out, start the dog where the other officer says the person has fled into the woods. And so at this point, I've got, since January of that calendar year, all of these training reps and hours in observation in training on the tracking with this dog. When I get this dog out on this track, it blows my mind. It is like nothing I have ever seen before. And once we get into it, this dog, I'm trying to move along and keep situational awareness and use proper tactics, but I am so blown away by what I'm looking at. This dog doesn't look the same as he has at any point in our time together up until this moment. He's on the ground like a sea turtle, almost flat on his stomach, swimming with all four legs and sniffing and doing nasal sampling and snorting like a warthog. And he's going through the leaves and pulling so hard on the leash that my mind is exploding with all of this new input. And I'm thinking, what in the heck is this? So we get into the woods, we go 20, 25, 30 yards, and he stops in the leaves and he's smelling intently and pushing his face into the leaves. And I go up there and I push the leaves back and I find a nice fat bag of crack cocaine. And it wasn't thrown from the trail. It wasn't lying on top of the leaves. This thing was buried under the leaves. So clearly our suspect had stopped and cached this bag of crack under the leaves in hopes that he would come back later and retrieve it and be able to maintain control of it, but didn't want to get caught with it short term. So stops and buries it under the leaves. I'm able to locate that and give it to the arresting officer for evidence, and then we continue on the track. Already mentioned, this is mid to late June in East Tennessee, and it is hot AF, kind of like it is right now. We're in the last week of June, and I've already mentioned the weather here and how hot it is. Humid. It is miserable out, and we've gone a short distance, and I'm already instantly pouring the sweat under the 3A soft armor, under uniform, full gear, and already we're both very hot. The trail goes down into a ravine and then up a very steep scramble of a ridge. And a small aside right here, one thing that I will advocate for if you're going to handle a tracking dog is to go get either a book or watch some YouTube videos or even go to some organized training, even better, of visual man tracking. When I worked for the Tennessee Department of Correction, I was on the visual man tracking recovery team and was got certified as a visual tracker and trained routinely with the tracking team doing visual tracking. You will never track faster than you can with a dog visually. But what I found out going into the canine tracking was my foundation in visual tracking really complemented the canine tracking. As we go along, I'll explain, you don't steer the dog, you don't drive the dog, but what I'm looking for are these visual clues, this ground sign that my dog is accurate and on the track, and it gives me this feedback loop of confidence that, oh yeah, my dog's locked, he's in the zone, we are on this dude, and we are going to catch it. We're doing good things. So with that in mind, we start up this ravine, and I'm seeing, because it's so very steep, the feet of the suspect being splayed out, doing the sidestepping motion to try to get traction on this hill. I see where he stepped on a downed small log / large limb that has rolled about half a turn out of position, and I see the wet spot underneath and some exposed leaves. And I'm thinking, this is great. This is exactly where he went. I'm seeing all kinds of corroborating sign that this is where the guy went. As we go up the hill, I slip and lose my footing, and I lose grip of the leash. And I see this leash slithering through the leaves and the saplings just like a snake leaving me. And I'm thinking, okay, no big D. I'm going to catch up. I'll get my footing. I'll get up here on top. I'll regain the leash, and I will get the dog, and we'll continue mission. So as I'm scrambling up this hill on all fours, I'm calling out to the dog, Barry, off. Barry, off liegen. Barry, Barry, here. Barry, off. Barry, 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 Barry. And I don't see any Barry, and I see the leash zoop, up to the top and out of sight. I get myself to the top of the ridge of the embankment, and I look around, and there is no dog. He's gone. I have no clue which way he's gone. At this point, with Terrain Association, I kind of know that there's some government housing this way, off to my left, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, well, this is the most likely way that this probably went. So I start going towards the government housing, and I see a few signs of a guy running and some ground disturbance. And I'm still calling out to my dog, Hansel and Gretel style, Barry, Barry, hello, Barry, come back to me, buddy. And I walk, and I'm almost to the apartments, and here comes Barry walking back to me, tongue out, completely smoked. This dog is done. It's hot. I'm pouring the sweat. His panting is at the edge of controllable, where now we're talking about heat casualty stuff, and I didn't even know near as much about canine care, TCCC, trauma, field medicine as I do now, but I already knew this isn't great. He's totally smoked, and he's not useful to try to reacquire a track, and I need to get him back to my car and get him some water and back in the AC and try to recover this dog a little bit before I do anything else. So don't know what happened in the housing complex, in the apartments. No bad guy ever reported himself as being bit. The dog came back, was still dragging the leash. I don't even know how the leash didn't create a tangle and stop the dog. Don't know what happened. Got the dog back, put him on my shoulders, carried him back out to the car, put him in the car, was able to recover him. We did make an arrest based on the ownership of the vehicle and documentation inside, and did get the guy. But saying all that to say this, that day taught me fear scent is an absolute thing. And every subsequent track that I had after that followed the same pattern. People who are laying tracks in a training environment don't have anything to lose. There's nothing on the line. There is no consequence to me laying this track. I'm comfortable. I'm in the work environment. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, but I'm not scared. I'm not running with skin in the game. Every time that I would get out and get on a track with someone who had something to lose, the dogs are showing this different behavior. So saying all that to say this, over the years, I am convinced that fear scent, adrenaline dump, the pheromones associated with real fight or flight is an absolute thing and must be considered. Over the years, I have not steered away from the fact that I still believe that there is accuracy to ground disturbance, the crushed vegetation, the exposure of different layers underneath, where there's ground moisture and wet leaves underneath, but the top layer exposed to the wind and the sun are dry, and then you step on that and it rolls a little bit with the action of the foot. And now there is a slight difference between that undisturbed layer that's been exposed to the wind and the sun and is very dry, as opposed to now we've peeled back a little bit of that layer underneath, and the dog can pick up on that, as well as the skin cells, the hair follicles, and the clothing fibers. And don't poo-poo the clothing fiber thing. Every time that you check the lint trap in the dryer, you're pulling out pieces of your clothes. Your clothes are constantly falling apart. They're getting threadbare. This is agitated and collected in the dryer, but you are leaving little pieces of clothing fiber behind, especially in heavy cover where limbs and saplings and other things, briars, might be pulling at your clothing. Absolutely, there are clothing fibers that are being introduced into this environment. And again, we can't get feedback from the dogs, but I believe that it's a combination of these things, having done it in multiple environments, multiple states, and even multiple countries. So, continuing to move forward. During this time, while I'm at my law enforcement agency and we're having these seminars, I'm introduced to a guy named Ross Serbing from Calgary, Canada. Calgary, Canada has a ton of hardscape. It is a very urbanized city, not a lot of green space, not a lot of greenways, and Ross comes up and is the first person that I'm exposed to in my career who's talking more specifically about hard surface and urban tracking. And I bring that up because he did a study, not he personally, but his department, in conjunction with this huge database of successful tracks and captures that became known as instinctive flight syndrome, which was a study of how do people react under pressure when they are running, when they are in that high stress environment. What are commonalities in physical traits and behaviors when they take off running? For instance, a door that leaves a building where the door swings out from the interior of the building, the majority of the time, 90% of the time, the people flee the opposite way of the hinges. So if the door has the hinges on the left and it opens out, they flee to the right. If the hinges are on the right and the door pushes out, they flee to the left. The majority of the time, people make an initial series of 2 to 3 right-hand turns with a follow-up left-hand turn, which falls in line with right-handed people being the most dominant in the world, and that 90 percentile falling in line with people being right-hand dominant. So they make a series of right-hand turns, then a left. They additionally found out that if you are able to get cover officers in the area and set up a perimeter and try to box these people in and put pressure on them, the more pressure they feel, the more likely they are to stay in this survival mode, this lizard brain caveman reaction where they're just running on fear and they aren't really thinking about it. Factors that make this behavior decrease is the lack of stress and the amount of training that the person has. If the person who is running has more high stress training, more military law enforcement training, Boy Scout training, if they've done things that have taught them tactics or thinking about high stress situations, or they're more used to a high stress situation, they can stay out of that lizard brain reactionary mode a little bit better, and they can think their way through these high stress situations and make decisions rather than just running on instinct. It's okay, Tobes. He wants to go upstairs, but that's not happening. So that was another little piece that was introduced to me, along with my background already in visual tracking, that I'm always in this real-time situational awareness analysis of, is where does this track look like it's going? I'm trusting the dog, but I'm thinking about these other things and trying to stay eyes up, ears up, and make sure that I'm not running headlong into danger. So with that being said, I want to discuss a bit about Calgary, Canada, and this is a good time to talk about the modern state of tracking and what a tracking program expectations are. One moment. Delicious. So, when I first started, a tracking program that was considered pretty good, better than average, had about a 20 to 30% catch rate. Now, if we're talking about batting averages and sports terms, that means every 2 to 3 tracks out of 10 opportunities are successful. And that's about where I was during my time with my law enforcement agency, was probably 3, 4 out of 10. Sometimes maybe a little bit above that. So I was certainly above average for my catch rate. My dog was super social and we had great rapport. And I was very highly requested when it came to tracking attempts because people liked working with me and my dog because they didn't feel like they were going to get bitten at the first opportunity out there in the woods in the dark trying to track a bad guy. Calgary, Canada, at the time that I'm getting this training and interaction with them, they're into the 50%, 60% range, which means they're catching 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 in an environment that's largely hardscape. So these guys had quite the reputation and were really a case study at the time for tracking and for hard surface tracking, because even given the challenging environment, and I'll do a little foreshadowing here where we're talking about my initial introduction into tracking 99, 2000, that it was accepted methodology at that point in time to start all tracking in some really nice grass and teach grass tracking, then wooded tracking, then starting moving into your more hard surface, austere ground, gravel roads, old paved roads that had grass growing through it in all kinds of cracks and patterns. And hard surface tracking was considered the pinnacle of difficulty and was the last thing that people really went for. And everyone used to dread the hard surface tracking and kind of avoid it. So that's just a little bit of foreshadowing about where we're going all the way up to the week before last. So with that being said, for Calgary to put up those kind of numbers on hardscape 25 years ago was super impressive. So continuing forward, tracking with my agency and having friends in other agencies nearby and having a relationship with a guy who worked the I-75 corridor in Tennessee, who was an absolute holy terror on I-75 and did more successful tracking and catching than most people could even dream of, and going out and backing him up, riding along and seeing his real world applications. This was the majority of my input up to this point. In 2005, I leave my law enforcement agency and, as referenced in other videos, go into the contracting arena, and I am on one of only 2 contracts that was the forerunner to the SOF multipurpose canine program. And I went to Iraq in 2005 for OIF 3 to use one of these dogs and conduct direct combat missions for the U.S. Army. During that time, part of what we were doing was absolutely hard surface tracking. And as you can imagine, there aren't a lot of nice parks or greenways or a lot of nice grass in Iraq for the tracking. So this had to be pretty much the worst conditions ever. Let's talk just momentarily about what causes a track to deteriorate over time. And 2 of those factors are going to be the wind, moving wind, and the sun. So when old people, our grandparents, great grandparents, would go and take bedding and rugs from the house and put them on a clothesline and hang them outside in the sun. It's not just that they were cheap and trying to save on electricity, but maybe with or without knowing it as scientific fact, they knew that UV light, that sunlight, broke down odor and made things smell better. So with that piece of information in mind, if you have an environment with a lot of direct sunlight on your track, this UV light is actively breaking down the scent and how strong whatever it is the dogs are following is, and that's what makes an age track more difficult over time, because that scent is being moved and shifted around within the terrain features by the prevailing wind. And if it has a lot of direct sunlight, that's also working to break it down. So we go into Iraq and it is almost entirely hard surface tracking with wind, with direct sunlight. And so this began my foray into really trying to work the hard surface angle and make sure that we were able to catch guys doing tracking in this austere environment. And we were absolutely successful in that. So following that, I get into SOF MPC, was one of the first trainers hired to the program. And when I'm talking about SOF MPC, let's be specific for a moment and brief the history on this a little. SOF MPC is the 5 Special Forces groups in the Special Forces Regiment in USAFIC, the 3 Ranger battalions in the 75th Ranger Regiment, MARSOC, and they still participate in the program by the methodology of it, but they broke away from SOF MPC as NSW East and West. So if anyone tells you that they have been in SOF MPC or participated in SOF MPC, and it was not with or with anyone other than the 5 SF groups, the 3 Ranger battalions, MARSOC, or NSW East and West, they're full of shit. I interviewed a guy during my duties at the day job a few months back who said he was a SOF MPC trainer in Europe for a time. SOF MPC, the nomenclature came up because there are, at that point in time, when the GWOT started, there were no tracking dogs in the DOD inventory. They had completely dropped it. And there are PEDs, Patrol Explosive Detector Dogs, PINs, Patrol Narcotic Detector Dogs, and 10-ish years or so into the GWOT, maybe 7 to 10 years in, the Combat Tracker Dog program did start, but at September 11th, 2001 and in 2005, no, it did not. And at the initial kickoff of SOF MPC 2006 into 2007, the reason Special Operations Forces multi-purpose canines are called multi-purpose canines is because we had to indicate skill sets of 3 or more, one of those being tracking, broken out separately as a capability of this dog, to make sure that Lackland Air Force Base and mainstream DOD could not take control of the program. In the police world, everybody calls a dog that does detection of some kind and does patrol a dual purpose dog. Well, there are dual purpose dogs in the DOD inventory, so we had to establish nomenclature that made the difference clear. So in the police world, patrol means tracking, area searching, biting, apprehension, building searching. All of that is just under this umbrella term of patrol. So you have patrol and detection, and if your dog does both of those things, they're a dual purpose. So SOF MPC is only that definition. There are other high-profile units that you may be aware of that also have dog programs that you may be aware of that also have their own very specific nomenclature that I'm not going to call out here. You can get on the internets and dig around if you're curious, but they have their own nomenclature. We have our nomenclature, and the aforementioned units are the only units that have ever participated in that program, and that is where that program resides. So, question imposters. Anyway, Going into 2007, I'm hired by 7th Special Forces Group, go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and instantly we are involved in the OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom campaign, which is Afghanistan, which also is hard surface tracking. And I think overall a generally shittier country than Iraq. So with that being said, working on hard surface tracking, Fort Bragg, North Carolina is located in the sandhills of North Carolina, which, as the name would indicate, there is a ton of sand down there, primarily sand and packed hard red clay. So there's a lot of opportunity for getting your dog kind of primed on this dry, austere, sun-blasted terrain ahead of going into Afghanistan. And so that was decent prep area for having your dogs going on deployment. While I'm at it, on deployment, tracking is one of the first things to start to suffer during your training, because there just isn't, from a safety standpoint, enough ground available to go out and be laying the kind of tracks you need to conduct good sustainment or advanced training once you deploy. So it's just baked into the cake. We know that once you deploy, you've got your dog at a high level. Hopefully you get to do some tracking over there, real applications of it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But because gunfights, bad guys, IEDs, legacy mines in Afghanistan, it's a super bad idea to be outside your fire base or FOB just stomping around thinking that you're going to lay a track and go back to the truck and get your dog and then run this track just for practice. So tracking is one of the first things that deteriorates with a dog. Now, when we're talking about tracking, I feel like it's important that I also point out that tracking is the number one most intense thing that a dog can do, both physically and mentally. Why is that? First of all, this is deeply rooted in cardiovascular fitness for the dog. They are moving themselves along the track, so there's locomotion involved. They have to do nasal sampling at least part of the time to be able to read and recognize that scent and stay with it. They're sucking up all kinds of debris and dust and whatever else that the environment has to offer. Depending on the time of day and the weather involved, they could be doing it in some very challenging climate conditions. The faster you go, the more cardio it takes from the dog to be able to move along that track and that route and be able to sample that scent and stick with it. So on the physical side, this is an extremely challenging event for the dog. On the mental side, it is a work in progress to take a dog that hasn't really done tracking before and get them to 50 yards, to get them to 100 yards, to get them to 100 yards with turns, to 150 yards, to 400. I'm being a little granular now, but really pointing out that it takes so much time to start getting a dog mentally conditioned to the fact to just stick with it a little bit longer and a little bit farther with more challenging turns and more challenging terrain features, and not give up on it and get this dog to follow out this track to its eventual end. And in a training scenario, getting their reward toy, or maybe in limited cases, being able to track down a decoy and have an apprehension. I guess right now is as good of a time as any to address that. Do not track exclusively to a bite. My boss at my law enforcement agency did that, and it makes some very, very bad long-term problems. It puts your cover officers and or teammates at risk when you are tracking. When the dog gets bored, when they think they have hit their distance hack and they should have found someone by now, if you have cover officers or other assaulters out there with you, this dog can absolutely get bored and frustrated and decide, well, this always ends in a bite for me and I can't find the guy, or I'm bored with it, or I'm getting tired and now I'm going to get aggressive and bite someone. That absolutely can and will happen. Toby. So do not overdo it with the tracks, tracking to bite, that is. So with that being said, throw in a bite. No more than 1 in 10 tracks should go to a bite. If you are getting street apprehensions and you're getting tracks to bites on the street, make it 1 in 20. Do not overdo it. They don't need that picture baked into the cake with every single track, as is the case with the law enforcement interactions I've had over the last 3-4 weeks. Some of these times, myself included, when I was still at a law enforcement agency, sometimes people will ask you to find a kid, to find someone who's in medical distress. No, Toby. Someone who's a diabetic, whose sugar is way out of whack and they're not in their right mind. Someone who has major health problems and they're overdue for their meds. With all of these cases, even with guys who have serious bite dogs, they've said, well, but my dog might bite them when I find them. And their family members say, that is small concern to me based on what their medical condition is right now. Do it anyway. I will sign paperwork that if you bite them, I don't care. We just need to find them and take care of their medical well-being. So with that being said, if you are at a law enforcement agency, that might be a request in an exigent circumstance, and certainly don't have your dog inloaded with so much biting that you're not able to carry this out. So let's continue. We are going into SOF MPC. At this point in time, I bump into the writings of Jeff Shetler. Jeff Shetler was a handler in Alameda County, California, and he was a bloodhound guy and a very successful one. And he did a lot of work for fugitive task forces, both U.S. Marshal and FBI. Had a lot of success doing that and started writing articles and books about it. Pardon. And I really liked his writing. My experience and my thoughts and methodology lined up really well with his, and it wasn't that I was looking for confirmation and that I needed a confirming source of information to make myself feel good about what I was doing, but I just started reading it, and there's new stuff that I'm taking in from Jeff Shetler, but because there was a lot of overlap in these other areas that I read, it really gave me confidence to follow the other stuff that he was talking about that was new to me, that he brought to the table for me personally. So started reading his articles and some of his books. The Tao of Trailing, TAO, talking about the Asian concept there. Red Dog Rising, has some good books out there. He retired, moved to the East Coast, and has GA K9, and one of his mainstays is a tactical tracking class that he puts on. And so I'm taking a lot of information at this point and bringing it into my position as a SOF MPC trainer. And Shetler talking about in these hard surface environments about how the prevailing weather can move that scent over. And he did a lot of hard surface tracking and trailing. And he talked about how in given a street, that if the person fled on the left side of the street and the wind is left to right, you're not going to find that scent on the left side of the street, that you're looking for physical features, terrain features, and obstacles where that scent is going to move to, and that's where that dog is going to go over and locate this scent and be able to follow that track/trail. And that really started to open my mind up about introducing tracking to dogs and long-term the expectations. So at this point, a small aside, a little back brief, when I ran the first SOF MPC class ever, and again, I'm not saying that anybody else who has said it was wrong or stole it from me, people can come to the same conclusion working totally separate from each other. But I'm dealing with a class of Green Berets and Rangers, and I was thinking of shooting analogies that I could bring into the discussion of tracking, because tracking, even in the law enforcement community, is always, well, I got to go fast. I need to track fast. I got to run people down. I got to catch people. So in this training environment where these guys are asking for more speed and how do we go faster, so I had also, stepping back a couple of steps, my time at the police department, I got into some of the competitive shooting sports to do different things and get better and hone my skills with firearms. So I have shot IDPA, IPSC, USPSA, not to be confused with USPCA, USPSA, and also 3-gun. And during this time, because there is a scoring component where you have the accuracy of the hits against the amount of time that it took you to do that, and you get major deducts for bad hits or complete misses. So the whole adage out there is you can't miss fast enough to win. And then going into 2005 and getting into gunfights and tactical situations in Iraq, you can't shoot fast enough and miss fast enough to survive a gunfight. So I brought this over to the tracking. You can't track fast enough in the wrong direction to catch anybody. So speed is always a cautionary tale in tracking. So you have to be accurate. Accuracy first. Make some catches. Find some discarded items on your real world tracks, some clothing items, some discarded evidence, things that prove you were tracking this fleeing suspect, this bad guy getting away. And now that you know that you are having good, accurate tracks, the speed will come, especially in the event that you get close to a real world bad guy and the dog gets inside of them while they are still fleeing, or they have gone to ground, and as you approach, they stand up and try to rabbit one last time, one last leg. These are things that will show the dog that there is an actual prey item on the move and that they want to be quick, but they also have to be accurate in order to catch the prey item. And a dog will learn over time through some real world encounters how to pick up the pace and then also be accurate in doing so and develop a little bit of speed. But accuracy must come first. A little bit of foreshadowing there. Yes, you can simulate the real world scenarios I just talked about in training a little. Don't get carried away with it. And I'm going to explain that because I always tell you how I'm doing it and what the thought process is behind it, and give you action items, not just give you some drive-by information. So with that being said, don't overdo these things when you're teaching a dog early on who doesn't have any real world deployments or applications yet, because they're going to get the wrong idea. You can get a dog that leaves the tracking too early and becomes a visual hunter, a bush hunter. You'll get a dog that tries to go too fast too quickly and leave the nose and go to the eyes. So again, everything is a cautionary tale. Don't overdo it. No one training technique is a problem solver. They can all have unintended consequences. So moving ahead, we're in the soft MPC era. I'm reading and studying Jeff Shetler. The tracking is going well. We've got dogs that leave and go on deployment tracking very well, and they come back and they kind of need a reboot, a restart. Oftentimes with the tactics involved of combat deployments in the GWOT, things are more tactically sound to work as an area search more so than a straight A to B track. The area search allows you to have more situational awareness and to cut off lines of patrol and grid this off with a dog with more security, with a longer line of security, to allow the dog to get out off leash ahead of you and maybe step on an IED. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about special operations tracking or law enforcement tracking. Don't take it for granted that this track that you're following is not an attempt to pull you into an ambush. You are following the flight of someone who has something to lose and wants to get away and wants to hurt you. And part of the plan might be to lay that track, especially if they know that you have a tracking dog or a tracking capability, and try to lay down an ambush to a pre-established fighting position. We'll go Ranger Handbook and say this could either be a deliberate ambush where they have an escape route already in mind and they have perhaps some booby traps along the way, or a weapons cache and a pre-planned fighting position, and that's a deliberate ambush. Or they may have a hasty where they have fled with some weapons and they see a good opportunity because they know the terrain better than you. They may know that you're following them with a tracking dog, and they may circle back onto some high ground and set up a hasty ambush for your approach, which is a lot of the instruction that Jeff Shetler covers in his tactical tracking class. So with that being said, I get dogs back that are soft on tracking or need a reboot, and we're going to talk about that as we get into the actual how of this and the action items. But we're going to keep moving along in our somewhat chronological discussion of tracking for me and our law enforcement agencies. So as we go along, we're GWAT, Jeff Shetler. I leave SOF MPC for a period. During that time, I go to Saudi Arabia to do a patrol-only train-up with Dutch Moyer. And while I'm there, I read a couple of more Jeff Shetler books. We do mostly area searching. While we're over there, we do show those guys a little bit of tracking, but their big kick was more of the area searching. Come back, deal with Department of State, which had no tracking, but it's always there in my mind. Then back into the day job that I'm at now. Toby, why are you? Oh, you're such a cute, poofy little dog, but man. So with that being said, back doing day job stuff and traveling about, doing a lot of training with interesting people and other agencies and finding out what they're doing. In the meantime, a former very close friend, handler from 7th Group, and Jason Stanzi from Houston Canine, in this middle period, both get involved with a program that we cannot speak about in this forum, but is a hard surface tracking capability. And now they are able to prove and develop some concepts through that program that really drive lessons home for both of them, and that they are able to share with the broader canine community about hard surface tracking. So moving up to the most recent time frame, the last 4 weeks, I'm doing training with local law enforcement agencies through the day job. And some of these agencies are really, really struggling with their tracking. One of the biggest things that I have been dealing with trying to help these other agencies, which also, let me back up slightly. Along the way, while 7th Special Forces Group is still stationed at Fort Bragg, I've had a long-standing relationship with High Point, North Carolina's police department, and they are big on tracking and quite good at it. So before the period where 7th Group is relocated, bracked down to the panhandle of Florida, I take our whole kennel and we go over, and I am one of the headline instructors for a tracking specific seminar put on by High Point, North Carolina at their police department. So another week of instruction with other canine teams from all around the East Coast and our SOF MPC teams out there training and working specifically tracking for an entire week. So just trying to hit the high points in the road to talk about the number of dog teams and the numbers of observation hours in both the training and operational environment for tracking, which is what I'm basing all of this on. So, with that being said, here lately, I'm going out. These law enforcement agencies are having problems. I've got full-time sworn and salaried law enforcement officers that I can tell have good dogs telling me I dread a track. Whenever they say they've got somebody running or they've got a bailout, I'm just thinking, oh, please pick another dog. Don't be me. Don't let me be the closest. I don't want to go track. I was mortified. That is one of the things that you should look forward to if you are a law enforcement officer with a patrol trained dog. If someone has a bailout or a runaway or there is a fugitive on the loose, they're calling you because the situation is already out of hand. If the situation weren't out of hand, this pursuit wouldn't have ended in a bailout. There are many, many pursuits that start where you could have controlled their ability to flee or use that vehicle to be in a vehicle pursuit to begin with. Anyway, saying all that to say this is your chance to go fix something that is already screwed up and your opportunity to catch a person. And the neat thing is, guys put so much pressure on themselves, and it used to be me included until I had this epiphany. The situation is already completely screwed. They've lost the guy. And if you were in an agency the way I was, that was in a more rural area where aircraft and helicopters, and certainly back in the time frame when I started, FLIR was the exception, not the rule. And certainly we didn't have handhelds available. The dog was probably the only way that we're going to catch this person today or tonight, as the case may be, because things have already gone completely to hell in a handbag. So to hear someone now telling me, oh, I dread them calling me to do a track, why? This is your chance to go and do one of the coolest things you can do with a dog, which is track down and locate someone who has already eluded law enforcement control. So let's talk about the worst things that I'm seeing right now, and probably the two biggest problems in order that people who have a tracking dog that are having problems or even don't think they have problems have: a bad start and what they're doing actions on during the track. So let's begin with the beginning, the start. If you don't start your track on the right foot and it's a garbage start, you're going to have a garbage outcome. You cannot begin a track that is completely off to a piss poor beginning, and rarely will you pan gold out of that situation. You have to have a good start to get a good result. What do I mean by a good start? Your dog has to be in the proper frame of mind. They have to be dialed in on what they're doing and at least be focused to the task at hand as things begin. If you don't have that and you don't do the right things to get that start, you're already going to you're there to try to untangle this rat nest, and your day is going to just continue to suck because your start sucked and things are not going to improve. The second thing in order is trying to steer the dog on the track because you think you know better, and you're looking at the given terrain features and you think you know what's going through this person's head, and you're trying to steer the dog along the course of the track. Those are the two worst things that plague tracking dog handlers. I even referenced to a couple of officers during this recent last 3 weeks the country music song, Jesus Take the Wheel. If you're doing canine tracks, you need to be talking to your dog, hey, I could take the wheel. Ickaboo. Quit messing with your foot. Come here. When we're out tracking, we just say, Ickaboo, take the wheel. Go find this track for me. Go sort it out because I don't know where it's at. And given the terrain features and the wind currents and the weather that's prevailing, this scent can be moving around and it doesn't have to be right on top of it. I'll try to address this and not forget the point as we go along. and the difference between building that speed and having some real world tracks and the beginning and the basics, the foundational training of tracking, which a lot of that starts in the sport world, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But to have this rigid discipline to the sport world and expectations of the sport world do not support what you want as an outcome as an operational tracking dog handler. So, with that being said, those are the two worst things that I've been dealing with and trying to help some local teams and other not local teams that I've dealt with over the last month get straightened out and back on a good path for tracking. So, how do we start the tracking? Now let's get into the meat of the scenario. There are a lot of different opinions on how to start a track, what should be the foundational basis. For me, for this guy, over the years, and I have a lot of documented success behind me as a soft MPC trainer, I have had at times 12, 14 dogs at my exclusive disposal for me to be able to train and observe, use in a real world scenario, gain that feedback, refine training, and have this continual loop of improvement where I was completely left to my own designs about how to set this thing up. So with that being said, when you've got a broad range of experience and a broad range of dogs, you're going to run across a lot of dogs that have a different mindset. Saying all that to say this, I will meet a dog wherever that dog is at in order to get that dog tracking. So this dog right here is a Schutzhund dog, IPO, which is just Schutzhund modified to some different rules for different countries, no big D. All of the foundation is still the same on that. And your Schutzhund / IPO / SVV, they will all start their dogs on food tracking, and they want it to be very accurate. They want the dog to be directly over top of the track, and they use food along the passing of the track to get the dog to put their nose to the ground to find something on the ground that's interesting to them. And in a cocktail style, stew theory style imprintation method, you're using the food to get the dog's interest on the ground, to get them to sniff the ground. And then along the way, the distance between placements of food morsels, you're imprinting the dog on the tracking of whatever it is that they smell on the ground in order to track. Again, I circle back to the start of this thing where, yes, I do believe it's a combination of ground disturbance, crushed vegetation, shed clothing fibers, skin cells, and hair follicles, and then in real world terms, the pheromones and adrenaline dump involved with fear scent. So with that being said, I will put absolutely anything on the ground that a dog is interested in and motivated by to teach them the tracking. And I'll keep it current in this last one block month. Even Jason Stanzi, who I have known for, well, I guess the first time I met him was probably around the 2000 or 2001 time frame or something like this, 2002 maybe, where he came as an employee of Von Litt Kennel to my law enforcement agency as part of the VLK seminar, and was one of their assistant instructors for that seminar. Was the first time I've met him. So easily we're going to say over 20 years. And he grew up obviously in the same schoolhouse that I came from and was doing all of the things that I was doing early on. And now over the course of his training career, he has gone to the point where he's not putting anything down at all. He wants to do just all normal passing, human scent. It's out there. The dogs are going to pick it up. And that's where he's at right now. And I don't disagree. And I will even reference the week specifically that we spent this month seeing all of his methodology and his training techniques He's got obviously a kennel. He's importing dogs and does basic classes for military and police down in Houston, and has a lot of hard surface area down there where he's starting. But I don't want to get ahead of myself yet. So with that in mind, I will put down food. I will drag the toy of preference for a dog. I will use my 6-foot leash to hook it to a toy on a rope or a Kong and drag that behind me while I walk and put that additional odor down along with my scent. Notice that I'm using the different words. Go back and look at the old catalog for dog talks. But my inanimate object, the toy, is leaving odor, while me, a living, breathing, organic organism, is walking along leaving scent. The two of those creating a picture for me putting this track down. So I will use anything at all that gets the dog's attention to put their nose on the ground, get their face down, finding that ground spoor and following this A to B line that I have laid. What I do when I start a track, it is always dead with the wind, what in the precision shooting community they would call a full value wind, straight from behind me, tracking with the wind to make that scent and odor picture move down and away in a linear fashion from the dog. If you don't do that, if you go into the wind, you're going to start setting the dog up for area searching rather than tracking. And we want to keep those compartmentalized and separate during this initial process. Do something with him. Play with him, acknowledge him. Talking to baby girl over there. But anyway, we want to go with the wind, get their head down, nose to the ground, to at least get the foundational basis of tracking set. Now, as we go along, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I want to point out something that many people that I have come into contact with over the years training struggle with. Today's, and this covers more than tracking. This is almost everything to do with canine training. Today's set in stone 10 commandment can be fungible, played with, stretched, and maybe even eventually completely disregarded as time goes by and the dog progresses in whatever discipline we're speaking about. Obviously, today we're talking about the tracking, but as this thing starts to develop, what is today's absolute set in stone must-do rule can be fudged or even disregarded later on. And I'm going to explain what that looks like and how we get there. So early on, with the wind, face down, and now we're going to add another concept that's pretty common in canine training. We're going to talk about extinction, extincting something out. So when you're talking about the food, and I've heard all the excuses, I've been at it for 25 years now. Oh, I don't want my dog following food. I want to catch people, not the Hamburglar. I don't want food on the ground. Food on the ground is just to get them down there to find something of meaning, something of value, to get them imprinted on what we're leaving behind when we flee, to get them to start noticing that that's down there and paying attention to it. So once I start, this is how we would start, and I'm going all the way back to my first basic course to show you the progression of the training. We go up, we stomp on the ground, we make a scent pad, kind of scuff up a little bit of a bowl in the grass, show them where, and visually have a reference for us to come back and start the dog, but to have this large signature on the ground for the dog to identify. And then we would walk along shuffling our feet together, kind of like we were on a train track or an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where they're shuffling their feet along. We would get to the turn and do what's called a triple lay if the track featured a turn, which would be make the turn, double back through the turn, and then go through the turn and continue the track. That was called a triple lay. And then we would put a toy down and come back and start the dog. Now, for the food piece of it or the toy piece of it, food specifically, I'll stay with one thing at a time. People always ask me, how do I get the food out and when does the food come away? When I make my scent pad, I stomp out a little spot here on the ground, in the grass perhaps, and I'm going to lay down 3, 4, 5 pieces of kibble, liver treat, whatever I'm using, whatever the dog is most interested in. Even if it's cut up hot dogs, I'll put down 2 or 3 pieces right there. And then as I step off, I will start laying down pieces of the kibble or food attractant every 3 feet or every 3rd step or every 5th step. And I will lay those pieces down on a schedule throughout the course of the track. And then as the dog begins to get the hang of it and progress and want to follow the track, is it important if the dog finds or picks up finds every piece of food? No, it's not. Is it bad if they do? No, it's not, because we're in the basic initial imprint stages of tracking. If they pick up every single piece of food and they follow it accurately all the way to the end and they get their ultimate reward toy, Ika, quit chewing your foot, and they get all the way to the end of it, then if they picked up every single piece, mission accomplished. They followed the whole track accurately. They had enough mental stamina to finish the track all the way to its termination. And now we are getting a dog interested in tracking. As they begin to understand the concept of getting to the final reward at the end, they might pick up the pieces at the very start, start skipping pieces along the way. As soon as I see a dog skipping pieces, I'm going to start expanding that interval between pieces. If I was every 3 to 5, I'm going 7 to 9 or 10 to 15, but I'm going to start taking out pieces over longer sections of the track between those little crutches that they need to stay interested in it. And that is the extinction piece that I'm referencing, is starting to pull that food out. Even if I'm extincting, as I begin step 2, which is introducing turns, I'll shorten that interval up and maybe even seed food a foot apart through the turn to make sure that they get it, to illustrate that turn to the dog. Then I'll go back on that stretched out schedule where I'm extincting it out and just use that extra to get them through the turns. Same thing with a toy. If I go out there with a slobbery tennis ball or a Kong, I may wipe it at the scent pad, and then every 10, 12 paces, I'm going to just strike it on the ground and put a little extra down there. I'll give it a few extra swabs on the ground going through the turn, just to put an extra bit of marker out there to get them through the turn. And as quickly as that's no longer needed, I will extinct that out. Point number 1 on don'ts: don't put down survey flags. Don't put anything eye level with the dog that can become a visual picture to what you're doing. Backing up a little bit in my chronological history, during my current day job, year before last, we went out west and trained with BORSTAR, the Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Canine, which has tracking only dogs, and they use a lot of sporting breeds, a lot of floppy ear dogs. And these guys and gals are running 8, 10, 12-mile tracks that are aged overnight, that are 6, 8, 10 hours old. And they do that for a variety of reasons, tactically and for safety. They don't like to track overnight unless it's an absolute have to. So through electronic surveillance, when they see a group moving across the border at night, they will have a starting point with that. They can plug that location into their ATAC on their phone and supply that information to the handler. And then any additional pings through electronic surveillance can be added to that information on ATAC on their phones. And then they go out and they start a track in the morning during daylight hours, where it's much safer. And also when these groups go into what their terminology is, a layup where these groups have to stop for water and shade and for rest while they are moving illegally across the border. So we also got to track with them, and one of their methods for helping the handler and marking turns without cueing the dogs, they take party streamers, the little light crepe paper, and they tie it in bushes and trees up off the ground where it's not as readily visible to the dog. And then it also makes a little wind sock, a streamer for the handler, for them to get a wind read as they see that turn coming. Do not use the survey flags. Don't get your dog hooked on a visual marker that they don't need when you're starting your tracking, especially if you are going to be an operational asset for some kind of law enforcement or military. Don't put ground markers down for your dog to get hooked on, because they will see them. They will start shortcutting. If your dog learns survey flags and they see a survey flag 50 feet out, 100 feet out, your dog's tracking performance is going to deteriorate, dip, or stop altogether while they go from here to that survey flag and then try to reacquire the track and make a turn or move to the next flag. Don't get them hooked on that. So I will start extincting that out. When I start with my turns, I want the turn to be either perpendicular or with the wind. So if I'm tracking with a perpendicular wind, then I'm going to make a right-hand turn and go on the downwind leg. Or if I'm tracking with a tailwind, I will make the turns perpendicular to the wind, and realize that my dog is going to have a little bit of wind drift to the downwind side of that track as the wind pushes the scent along. But I'm not going to make a turn into the wind while I'm teaching tracking to the dog, getting them imprinted on it, because now I have veered back into area searching / scouting again, and that is not where I want to be. I'm imprinting the dog on the tracking. So another big concept right now at this point in time, we're doing basic tracking with our dog. One of the two things that we have at our disposal for anything to do with canine, and especially teaching something new, is going to be a ritual. There are physical rituals and there are equipment rituals or equipment cues to try to let the dog know what the task at hand is and what our expectation of them is going to be. Going back to the competitive shooting world, or just shooting in general, even training, when you're on the range, your range master, your range instructor is going to outline everything they expect for you to do in the next string of fire. And the range master, range instructor is going to say, shooter, understand the course of fire? And you say, yes. And then they're going to say, is the shooter ready? And they're going to say, yes. And then they're going to hit the pro timer or call threat or blow a whistle or however they initiate the action. And then that's going to be your cue to begin. Here's another problem that we have addressed with dogs over and over, is the inability of dogs to speak and give us real-time feedback about what's going on verbally or decisively. Come here, Akaboo. I can't go out in the woods and say, shooter, understand course of fire, shooter ready, yes, begin, and have her know on a new task or on a task that we are just teaching and have the results be good. I have to go out there and signal intent to the dog, either through a ritual, a physical ritual, motions that we are taking, or through equipment cues, or build a ritual out of a combination of the two of these things. So at Von Lick, early on, initially, the ritual was built with the physical and equipment cues of, you walk to the scent pad on the 6-foot leash on some kind of a control collar, either a choke chain or a pinch collar, as the case may be. You have your leather collar with your 30-footer already hooked to it, and the leather collar is only for the tracking. You put the leather collar over the head. You stand on the 30-foot leash. You take the 6-foot leash and you stow it around your neck and waist. You put the dog into the down. You put the leash under the front leg and turn the snap for the collar down to pull the head down and the pressure of the leash maintaining the airway open. You have the 30-footer on the ground behind you. You present and or tickle the scent pad and you tell the dog, sook it out. And this is how you start your track. This is how you convey your intent. This is how you get the dog mentally ready to track, and this is how you start your track, and this is called a ritual. I have gone completely away from the collar with leash under the leg. Jason Stanzi of Houston Canine has gone completely away from putting the leash under the leg, even though we were both raised on this. We have found that it creates more problems. There are probably a handful of dogs that benefits, but the number of dogs in total that this is a problem for and create more problems than they solve outnumber the dogs that it benefits. So we have completely put this by the wayside. Also, fast forward to modern times where most people are using a harness or a vest for tracking. The collar is kind of a little bit passe. I still do collar tracking in the training environment, even though I'm going to move to a harness operationally, but it doesn't hurt or hinder anything. But the big takeaway is going under the leg is not really necessary and creates more issues than it solves overall. So with that being said, we still have to use some kind of a ritual to get the track started, which brings me back to our adventures in recent times where guys are having terrible, terrible starts to the track. One of these big reasons is coming out there and generating the wrong mental picture, giving the dog the wrong input, eliciting the wrong type of energy for what you need to do at the moment, and creating a very, very shitty start to a track. Number one offense to that is bringing your dog out in too high of an energy, too agitated of a state for you, or having a start phrase or catchword that creates the wrong mental picture for the dog. Speaking specifically of recent times, find the man. We're in a training environment. There's no man out there to find. I don't want that kind of mental energy out of your dog to start this track. And the first thing you do is come out there and say, find the man. One of the teams that I was working with in the last month, that was their number one problem, was coming out there and saying, find the man. And this dog looking up, getting erect, having, idiots. Why are you two going to start romping right there at the foot of the stool? Hey, I wish you would go play somewhere else. So with that being said, let me just double check, make sure that we still have the... All right, I'm still in there. I'll adjust back a little bit. Oh, you tool bags. So with that being said, don't go out there and start off with find the man. The team that I referenced before from that I referenced before that worked the I-75 corridor in Tennessee, that guy started his tracks with find a man, and it was not a problem because they were finding a lot of bad guys and biting them. And this dog had so much experience at this point that he knew that there was a guy on the run, that the dog already understood that he had to be accurate in order to catch what he wanted. And finding the man did not put him in the wrong headspace. It put him in the right headspace. But at this point in time that I'm riding on him, along with him on these deployments, you're talking about a dog that already had over 100 successful tracks to a bite. And saying find the man did not put him in the wrong headspace. For the majority of working dogs out there, going out there with find the man or find him is the wrong input that gets the wrong energy and the wrong start to your track. Now, how do we start the track? It depends on where your dog is at experience-wise. And that's why earlier I referenced what is today's set in stone rule can be completely thrown out the window, all depending on prevailing conditions later on in your dog's career. You have to be observant. That's why I referenced the whole range instructions and firing line scenario. Shooter understand, course of fire, shooter ready, threat, or beep, or begin, or whatever the situation is to kick off the sequence of events. If you come out of your car or trailer or vehicle, or you walk to your track and you've already got the long line on, and your dog is face down on the ground already sniffing, casting for ground sign, if they walk up to the start of this track, if you're starting now with at least a known point of departure for your track, or you have a scent pad, and your dog drops its head on that scent pad and starts to bracket a little and then try to establish direction and go, and you stop that dog to go back and do a ritual, shame on you. You have to be paying attention to what is going on. If your dog, and we'll stick with the Jeff Shetler Tao of trailing with our Asian theme for a moment. If your dog's chi is focused and their mind is right, and they have left the vehicle or the trailer and they have arrived at the training and or real world deployment site, and they are already showing understanding of the situation, or they are already in the frame of mind that is applicable to your deployment, and their nose is down and they're ground sniffing, for you to stop them to go through a ritual is just you not understanding how to best handle your dog. Let that dog start feeding line, feed that line out, and start your track. Let me pause right here to talk about equipment. You need to track on a 30 or a 15-foot line, at a minimum, a 12 to 15-foot line. Apparently, again, with guys I'm dealing with this month, apparently there's a dude out there running classes and telling people that they need to track on a 3 or 4 foot line. That's stupid. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now that that's stupid, and you are not going to have fun tracking or good tracking or ever catch anybody tracking on a 3, 4, or even a 6 foot line. Whatever it is the dog is following, and I will leave that open to debate, but I'm telling you what I believe they're tracking and why. If you are 3 or 4 or 6 feet behind this dog and they blow a turn and they need to reacquire a turn or need to cast or make some kind of a loop, and you are 3 or 4 feet behind them, you got problems. Because now, no matter what it is that you adhere to as far as your tracking methodology, you're walking all in it and leaving new information and new disturbance behind that while you're trying to sort out this turn. And tracking on less than 12 feet of line is stupid. I'm going to go out and put my marker down now that 12 is the absolute bare minimum that you need to have out, so that at least if the dog blows a turn and you recognize that you can stop and allow them a little bit of room to circle and work that and try to sort it out before you go and add all of your scent or ground disturbance or whatever it is that you're going to talk about to that picture. Borstar, which again, some of the best tracking teams that I have ever seen and worked with, they're all on 30 feet of leather. Jeff Shetler and his tactical tracking course and his real world deployments, 30 feet of leather. I'm on 30 feet of tubular nylon. I'm a nylon guy, not a leather guy, both for weight and storage and bulk, because on soft MPC deployments, I don't know where my track begins. When Borstar goes out, they are deploying a single purpose tracking dog on a track, and that piece of equipment is already immediately there for use. In soft MPC, you might be doing other things, and then you get to the target, and then all of a sudden there's a reason for you to go track. That means you're pulling out a 30-foot line that you weren't otherwise using, where bulk, weight, and storage capacity come into play. Always track with gloves. Even if you're a leather line tracker, you can get away without gloves with leather, but you better be tracking. And as far as biothane, F2 box loads of biothane. Biothane sucks. It's bulky. It's as bulky as leather. It's as heavy as leather, and it's not as nice on your hand as leather. It absolutely is not slip resistant when it gets wet or gets mud on it. And it is not as friendly as tubular nylon. Biothane sucks. Do with that information what you will. Always track with gloves. You have to be able to allow that line to pass through your hands and be smooth letting that line out and bringing it back in, and not having discomfort or blisters or pain in your hands limit the amount of line that you will feed to that dog or the way that you can strip it back in because of comfort to your hands. And then if you're tracking in certain areas, including the El Paso sector, Tucson sector down on the border where we were training with these teams, all of the pokey plants and sharp objects out there, even middle of America here in Tennessee, you may find yourself in a briar thicket, and being able to manhandle briars and get them off of your clothes and off of your dog to free yourself, gloves are absolutely just priceless on a track. Handling thorny bushes and trees and growth, and being able to feed that leash without worrying about burning up your hands. So often I see guys out there trying to feed line out hand over hand, or letting it go real slow when their dog is in the track and hit it hot. You need to let that line feed in a controlled manner, but let it feed quickly, and not be giving your dog this herky-jerky motion when they are acquiring scent on a track and they need that line to feed out smoothly. If you're stopping it and messing up your dog's chi because you're worried about your hands, shame on you. Put good gloves on. So with that being said, we are tracking on the 15 or 30 feet of line. We got gloves on. You go out there, you put the dog down, and they acquire that track. You better be able to read and recognize that and allow that to just start manifesting and go. And do not break that dog's concentration to come back and do a ritual that you don't need at this moment. Conversely, I have gone out there and I have taken a dog out to start a track, and they are bowed up, head up, chest out, looking for heads, wanting to go grab somebody, find a man, do an area search, but they do not want to go face down on the dirt or on the ground and start a track. You better not start that track. You need to read and recognize that their chi is not focused, and now you need a ritual. Even a seasoned advanced dog can come out there and show you shooter does not understand course of fire, shooter not ready. And if you have a dog that you haven't been doing a ritual on because they've been focused, and you don't recognize that they're not focused, and you don't give them a ritual to try to refocus them, you're going to have a bad start. Shame on you. The results are going to suck because your dog is not ready to go track. So going back in time a little bit, at 7th group, me, a Green Beret, and an Air Force handler made a 3-man team and went and competed in the Von Lick Kennels Working Dog Olympics. And one of those events is tracking. I took one of our government program dogs out there that I had trained, and we could track accurately 11, 12 minutes to the mile, which is booking if you're doing an accurate track. I go out there with this dog on the tracking venue to compete for tracking, and his head's just not in it. He is looking man, he's thinking man, he's bowed up, and I keep trying to put him down at the presented start of the track to get him tracking, and he just keeps wanting to stand up and go headhunt. I used this in this competition, and I used it 2-3 weeks ago with a law enforcement handler. Bring this dog up to the track and just put them in a down stay on a long line and just stand there and say nothing and do nothing. And if they stand up and look into the wood line or out into this field and try to bow up or act like they're head hunting or looking for a man, if they do anything other than put their nose to the ground and start sniffing, make them lay back down and put them in another obedient down stay and just stand there and do nothing. 99.9 times out of 100, and this worked for me with this particular law enforcement team this month, you stand there and do nothing, and the two of you are just talking while casually observing the dog, they're going to get bored, and the scent that's available on the ground is the only game in town, and you're going to see them start sniffing the ground in front of them and maybe shuffle on their elbows and take a little cheat of a low crawl. Allow that. Allow the cheating, watching it. They start shuffling along on their elbows and they're sniffing the scent. As they stand up, just let line casually start feeding out in a controlled manner. If you are tracking on a 30-foot leash, you better not start walking until you give them at least 12, 15 feet of that line before you take the first step. If you are in an area where there aren't any immediate tangle hazards, give them all 30. Let them get to the end of that, and then with shock absorber like elbows, step into that track and start moving. Make this dog acquire the track, get you on scent, and establish direction before you start walking. Another big bugaboo that I've been fighting this month with some of these teams, a dog that just acquires a little bit of scent and then you immediately start walking, or say something in support of that. If you give them some kind of verbal encouragement, oh, good boy. Yeah. What you got? Oh, good. Find him. Any of this stuff will break that dog's chi. If they start acquiring a track, and you start either walking or running your mouth, giving them verbal encouragement and confirmation, they are going to be less likely to continue tracking and just keep pulling along in the direction that you like, because you're giving them that feedback and you're moving your feet. Also, don't pick up too much speed too quick. If you really get excited on this track and you start building momentum and their ears start pointing back, oh, Dad's starting to kind of jog. And well, now we really got some speed going. Oh, cool. Now they're just Alaska sled dogging, and they're pulling you along and building up too much momentum and too much speed. And as long as you keep running and booking it, they're going to keep running and booking it. So don't do that. Get them started right. Use the ritual if you need it. Skip it if you don't. And then we start advancing our dogs. We're making turns. More action items, do's and don'ts. I know that I'm getting long here. Where are we at? Oh my goodness. As you begin to advance your dog, and I advance my dogs, when I'm laying tracks in excess of 500-600 meters, certainly when I'm getting out to a mile, I am making twists and turns without regard to wind direction. However, I always end a tracking exercise with the wind or perpendicular to the wind. I never end it going into the wind, because that's an area search. Dogs bookend training sessions, and their takeaway is whatever they were doing when this thing comes to its termination and they get their last reward. If it's the toy, if it's apprehending the decoy, if it's a pan of food, whatever that is, if they were wind searching and going into the wind when they found it, that's the last takeaway is, oh yeah, well I might have tracked 3/4 of a mile, but the last 100 meters was a dead straight into the wind area search. You just did a really long area search exercise, and that's what they got paid for, and that's the mental takeaway from the dog. Always end perpendicular or on a downwind leg. Placement of your final reward object. Dogs are low to the ground. Just because we're up here and we can see further than they can from our perspective, a toy out on the ground in rather low grass is not as obvious to a dog as it is to us. The takeaway here is don't go finding these terrain features that you think that a decoy or a toy needs to hide behind. Stay away from these big objects. Don't hide your toys or your decoys routinely behind trees, brush piles, thickets. My favorite thing to do in a large open setting, think of an industrial park, if you will, or a drop zone if you're on a military base. I like to find a place where a hill just rolls over, or there's a shallow ditch, or there is a sunken roadbed that's not obvious to the dog. If I'm in a bite suit, that's where I'm going to go and lay down on the downwind leg on my track, is in a shallow ditch that has nothing else around it, not a tree, not a brush pile. There is just this open ground, and then as the dog tracks, I've had dogs track into me and hit me with the crown of their head and then realize I'm there and then bite me. That is the best end to a track ever, because there is no visual marker that signals the termination of the track. That is the worst thing you can do, is put your final reward destination with a three-dimensional terrain feature or visual object that a dog can tie that to. Always, always, always make your track end, whether it's a toy or a decoy, in the most mundane way possible that has nothing significant to it in relation to the terrain that you're in. And that dog will follow that track religiously to its final termination. Early on in SOF MPC, there was a lot of training scenarios based around tracking a bad guy to their hideout, to their location, to a cave, to a building, to a structure, being able to shift gears with that dog, assemble an assault element, blow the door off this building and go inside, and then do CQB and apprehend our bad guy in the interior of this building. What the unintended consequence was, we laid tracks from outside an urban area or a village to a building, hit the building, and bit the bad guy. In a very short amount of time, the dogs realized that as soon as they tracked to a setting that had buildings or a village, they quit tracking and would pull us to the first doorway of the first available building. What if the guy went 2 or 3 buildings deep, or went into a building and left a building and went to another building? Think of apartments or a trailer park for you law enforcement types. What if they track to the first trailer of someone they know and they go in the front door and the person says, "Hell no, you can't stay here. You brought the cops with you." And they send them out the front door or out the back door, and this track did not terminate in that building but goes to another building. The dog has to track religiously and faithfully on that track and then leave or continue from that building to another building. The point being, a building is a 3D terrain feature, and in training, if you go to the first building and that's where the bad guy or the toy is always at, your dog will quit tracking and take you to that first building based on historical record, data on previous engagements. Go back and look at training aid placement video. So with that being said, always put your toys, your food, your decoy, even if you're in a flat field or in the woods, dogs don't see you if you're motionless. Lay down flat on the ground, even if you don't have a shallow ditch. The dog won't see you nearly as often as you think they will, and you won't create the problems that will manifest if you go out there and hide behind a brush pile or a tree. You will create a tree hunter, a bush hunter, 10 out of 10. Other things right now. Once you advance your tracking, and I've got dogs at the day job right now that I can lay a 1 mile plus GPS confirmed track and have them successfully run that. Get you a Garmin Rhino or a Garmin Astra if you can afford it, that has the Rhino with the canine tracking collar. Not for the dog though, stick with me, for the track layer. You can turn on that GPS and you can carry the collar with you while you lay the track, and you can either stay out there or lay the toy down, and you have plotted your route of travel on the GPS with the collar. And as an observer, you can hang back and allow the team to follow this track. It gives you a bunch of advantages. You can see if the dog is on the downwind flank of the track, and if that lines up, if the dog is where they should be relative to the wind and terrain features. You can allow a team to blow a turn and try to reacquire that for a long time even. You can allow them to flounder quite a bit because you know exactly where you're at in relation to the track. And then you can also move ahead and put them back on a clean part of the track and get them back onto it if you need to. Trying to think of other advancing techniques. Another thing that we shot down that I have not been a believer in, that Jason Stanzi with us shot down: do not use a garden sprayer with distilled water in it and then walk on it and then expect your dog to stay on top of the distilled water trail. It's not necessary. It's a waste of time. And now you are getting your dog hooked on that exact path, being right there on it. If you go back and you look at the Calgary Canine Program, if you read Jeff Shetler's books, that is not a real world foundational basis for tracking. If you spray it on that sidewalk and you have a perpendicular wind, the scent that is going to be there in real world terms that has moved across the street to the opposite curbing of the sidewalk, or the building in the alley on the opposite side, or the shopping center where all of the buildings touch each other, and that's where the scent is pulled up. A chain link fence with privacy strips in it or privacy mesh is a huge obstacle terrain feature that scent in a real world tracking scenario will pull up against, and that's where your dog is going to be. If you go through the trouble of spraying distilled water and walking in it, that's not going to be there when you use the dog, and we absolutely unequivocally proved that last week during the day job when Jason of Houston Canine was in working with us. And now I want to bring you full circle to where he's at. Now with his classes, he starts his dogs on urban settings, on hard surfaces, up against a curb, either concrete curb or the edge of a sidewalk or a natural terrain feature, a retention wall. And he goes along and lays the toy and then follows the path right back and shows the dog empty hands. And now the dogs start trying to acquire that scent right there on the hard surface against that natural obstacle, that terrain feature, even though it's a man-made terrain feature. And 5 out of 5 work dogs last week, we started proving right there on hard surface, all the way from this IPO trained shepherd to my Eastern Bloc import who's never done hard surface tracking as of yet. 5 out of 5 dogs absolutely showed odor recognition and started tracking. If you want to see footage of that, go over to my Instagram. Those videos are posted of us doing urban tracking. So now Jason, in a real revolution in tracking, has totally turned the paradigm from, we don't start on soft surfaces viewing hard surface tracking as the most advanced piece of it. He starts at hard surface, gets them following scent on hard surface at the most difficult end of the spectrum. And he says, when I take these law enforcement teams and start them on hard surface and go backwards into the woods and onto grass, he said it's gravy for the dogs. And I absolutely believe it, and it makes perfect sense. Whereas for years, we spent all this time on the grass dreading hard surface tracking, thinking that, you know, this is the worst possible thing and it's going to be so difficult in order to achieve when we get there, when in fact you can just start there and make everything else a downhill ski slope for the dog as you introduce these other areas. And I think it's brilliant, and it absolutely proved itself in real world terms with 5 dogs last week when he was here working with me on the day job. Start with your hard surface. Don't be afraid of it. When you go out, put the toy down and then come back and show empty hands. For years with the original training we started with, we would tease the dog with a toy while the handler posted up, and we would go 100 yards out and then throw the toy in the air and let the dog see us putting the toy down on the ground and then show empty hands. Well, the dog didn't want to acquire scent. It wanted to go out there visually to the last point where he saw us with the toy. If you let the dog see you and you tease and you go out with the toy, plant the toy, and then you still fake that you have it and fake on your double lay back to the start of the track and show empty hands, the dog starts right there where the last place he saw you fake with the toy, which is right in front of it. And then they search the whole entire route all the way out, picking up that scent until they locate the toy all the way out there at the very far end. And it worked beautifully. Some of my dogs I've had to reboot coming back in country from a deployment. I will absolutely put food down along a track and make them track to their pan of food. And if the track is piss poor, I'll let them get right up to the pan, and then I'll pull them back and put them on the trailer and lay a new track and let them see the pan while they drool on the trailer as I leave with it, and leave it out there and make them track to get their food. And then once they mentally reboot and accept tracking again, then I will allow them to eat on a regular schedule, and we go back to tracking for toys just like they were before they went on deployment. Trying to wrap it up. I know we're at 2 hours plus. Tracking is a ton of fun. It's grueling. You better be dedicated to it. It takes a ton of maintenance training to keep your dog able to go long distances and have that mental and physical stamina to be able to execute those long ones. When we did go to Von Lick from 7th Group and I couldn't get my dog to start on that track, and even when he refused the ritual, I just stood there and waited until he got bored and started sniffing. And I recognized that he was ground sniffing, and he stood up, and I fed line. I did not have my dog trained to stop and down on the scent articles, but I found both articles that were discarded as evidence on my track, and we tracked straight over top of them, so I knew that we were accurate. I called it out to the evaluator. We took 2nd place in that competition, and they said that the only reason I didn't get first is because my dog didn't stop and down on the articles, but it's soft MPC and we don't do that shit anyway. So 2nd place was great, super accurate track, but I recognized that my dog's head wasn't where I needed, and I didn't step off with a bad start, and I was able to avoid bad results. Oh, you two are killing me. Anyway, that's kind of the training arc and evolution for tracking for me over the last 25 years. It was a great training week with Jason. Great to see him. He was also at the Dothan seminar, and I did the Dothan recap, and also have on Instagram the Hogan's Alley that I was doing with Jason. Super knowledgeable. The first guy that I ever went to Europe with to buy dogs, and nobody in the business is any better than him at picking dogs in Europe. There are guys that are as good, but nobody's any better. Take that to the bank. Get a hold of him. Get a hold of me. If you don't live geographically anywhere near us, reach out anyway. Maybe we can find a guy that we know in our network in your area that can help you. Tracking is awesome. If you need help, hit me up on email or Instagram. Always happy to give you the information. It's free. Thanks for watching till the end. I know there's more I'd like to say, and I always leave something on the table, but it is what it is. Thanks for watching. Thanks for checking us out on Instagram. Thanks for looking at the dog equipment. We'll see you on the next one.